What happens when a franchise spends an entire decade searching for a savior, finds him, watches him dominate the league, and then has to watch him slowly forget how to tie his own skates? In the National Hockey League, greatness is a currency paid for in bone, blood, and gray matter. We tend to view our hockey heroes as modern-day gladiators, men carved from iron, impervious to the violence they willingly inherit. But the ice is a cruel equalizer. It doesn't care about draft pedigree, million-dollar contracts, or God-given talent. Today, we look at three men who were built to rule the hockey world. Three men who had the throne in their sights, only to have destiny violently tear the crown away. These are the careers that should have been legendary, but fell apart far too soon. By 1991, the hockey world was searching for its next messiah. Wayne Gretzky was rewriting the record books in Los Angeles, but he was a surgeon operating with finesse. The NHL wanted a titan. Enter Eric Lindros. He was dubbed the next one, a physical anomaly who stood 6'4" and weighed 230 pounds, yet possessed the hands of a premier playmaker and the mean streak of a traditional Broad Street bully. He was so highly coveted that his refusal to play for the Quebec Nordiques triggered a multi-team trade saga that shook the league to its core. When he finally landed in Philadelphia, he didn't just meet expectations, he obliterated them. Riding with the legendary Legion of Doom line, Lindros captured the Hart Trophy in 1995 at just 22 years old. He was a freight train with a violin. He was utterly, terrifyingly unstoppable, until he met a league that played by a set of unwritten, brutal rules. The flaw in Lindros' game wasn't his skill or his heart. It was his posture. Because he had spent his entire life being bigger and stronger than everyone else, Eric had a habit of skating with his head down, looking at the puck. In the dead puck era of the late 90s, that was an invitation for a death blow. First came Darius Kasparaitis in 1998, delivering a concussion that sidelined him for weeks. But the fatal blow to his dynasty arrived in the spring of 2000, Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. New Jersey's captain, Scott Stevens, a man who hunted players in the neutral zone like a predator, saw Lindros crossing the blue line with his eyes locked on his skates. The hit was legal for its time, but it was devastating. Lindros lay on the ice, his brain bruised, his eyes vacant. He was never the same player again. What followed was not just a physical collapse, but a public, agonizing war of words. Flyers general manager Bobby Clarke publicly questioned Lindros' toughness, accusing him of letting minor injuries keep him out of the lineup. In reality, Lindros was fighting a silent, terrifying killer. At a time when sports science treated concussions like mere bell ringers, Lindros' brain was struggling to recover. He suffered 6 diagnosed concussions in Philly. The man who was built to destroy defenses was now living in darkened rooms, unable to tolerate light or sound, struggling with memory loss. He would eventually be traded, playing out his career in New York, Toronto, and Dallas as a shadow of his former self. He retired in 2007 at age 34. He made the Hall of Fame, yes, but the hockey world was robbed of his peak. We never got to see what a healthy 30-year-old Eric Lindros could do. While Philadelphia was witnessing the rise and fall of their savior, Detroit was building a powerhouse on the back of a different kind of monster. In the Soviet Union, players were trained to be chess pieces, precise, disciplined, and fluid. But Vladimir Konstantinov was a war machine. When he arrived in Detroit in 1991 as part of the legendary Russian Five, North American players expected another skilled, soft European. They were dead wrong. They called him the Vladinator. He was a defenseman who treated the ice like a battlefield. He didn't care about flashy goals. He cared about making his opponents miserable. He was the anchor of a Red Wings defense that was slowly turning Detroit into hockey town. By June of 1997, Konstantinov was on top of the world. He had just finished second in Norris Trophy, voting as the league's best defenseman. He had just helped Detroit sweep the Philadelphia Flyers to win the Stanley Cup. During the championship parade, over 1 million fans chanted his name. He was 29 years old in the absolute prime of his physical life, and globally recognized as one of the most feared players on Earth. 6 days later, the heaven turned into a living nightmare. On June 13th, following a team golf outing, Konstantinov, teammate Slava Fetisov, and team masseur Sergei Natsakhanov boarded a hired limousine. The driver, whose license was suspended for drunk driving, lost control of the vehicle. The limousine mounted a curb and crashed head-on into a tree at high speed. While Fedosov escaped with minor injuries, Konstantinov was not so lucky. His head had slammed into the limousine's internal partition. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, suffering from severe head trauma and spinal injuries. He spent several weeks in a coma, fighting for his life while an entire city held its breath. When Vladimir finally woke up, the terrifying truth became clear. The Vladinator, the Iron Man who had spent his life crushing opponents, was gone. In his place was a young man who had to relearn how to speak, how to swallow, and how to survive. He was confined to a wheelchair, his brain permanently damaged. The 1998 Red Wings season was fueled by a singular, obsessive mission: win it again for Vladdy. They wore his number 16 on their chests. Every time they wanted to give up, they looked at the empty locker they kept pristine for him in the dressing room. And when Detroit swept Washington in the finals to repeat as champions, one of the most emotional moments in sports history unfolded on the ice. Steve Yzerman didn't hoist the cup first. He immediately placed it in the lap of Vladimir Konstantinov. As his teammates pushed his wheelchair around the rink, Vladdy smiled. He was still part of the family, but his career, his physical prime, and his dream of becoming a Hall of Fame defenseman were left on a dark road in Birmingham, Michigan. To understand the third tragedy, we must go back even further, to an era where goaltenders still wore fiberglass masks and played with reckless abandon. In the early 1980s, the Philadelphia Flyers believed they had found the heir to Bernie Parent. His name was Pelle Lindbergh. Imported from Stockholm, Sweden, Lindbergh was a sensation. He wasn't just a good goalie. He was a cultural icon in Philadelphia. With his bright blonde hair, charismatic smile, and hyper-athletic style, he took the NHL by storm. In 1985, he became the first European-born goaltender to win the Vezina Trophy as the league's best netminder. He led the Flyers to the Stanley Cup finals. At 26 years old, he was the undisputed king of Philadelphia sports. He had the world at his feet and a passion for dangerous high-speed toys. Lindbergh loved speed. He owned a customized, high-powered crimson Porsche 930 Turbo, a car notorious for being difficult to handle at high speeds. On the night of November 9, 1985, after a team gathering, Lindbergh, who had been drinking, got behind the wheel of his beloved Porsche. At 5:41 a.m., speeding down a road in Somerdale, New Jersey, Lindbergh failed to negotiate a sharp turn. His car slammed head-on into a concrete wall surrounding an elementary school. The impact was horrific. Lindbergh suffered brain death upon impact. He was kept on life support for 2 days so his family could fly in from Sweden to say goodbye, and so his organs could be donated. He was 26 years old. The reigning Vezina Trophy winner was gone in an instant. When we look at these three tragedies, a haunting pattern emerges. These men did not just play hockey. They carried the weight of entire franchises on their shoulders. Eric Lindros was expected to save the Flyers from mediocrity and the NHL from a post-Gretzky lull. He played through agonizing head injuries because the culture of the era demanded that a real man ignores his own brain's pleas for help. Pelle Lindbergh was a young superstar who felt completely invincible, driving a dangerous sports car through the suburbs of a city that treated him like a god. Vladimir Konstantinov was a warrior who survived the brutal Soviet system only to be taken down by a reckless limousine driver, celebrating a championship he had bled to secure. The very qualities that made them legends on the ice, their fearlessness, their belief in their own invincibility, were the very things that made them vulnerable off it. The what-ifs surrounding these three men are some of the most agonizing in sports history. If Scott Stevens' shoulder is just 2 inches lower, or if Lindros learns to skate with his head up, does he win 3 Stanley Cups in Philadelphia? Does he finish his career as one of the top 5 scorers of all time, right alongside Lemieux and Jagr? If Vladimir Konstantinov's limousine driver takes a different route home on June 13, 1997, how many Norris trophies does he win? Does Detroit win the Stanley Cup in 1999 and 2001, cementing themselves as the greatest modern dynasty in hockey history? And what of Philadelphia's goaltending? Ever since Pelle Lindbergh's death, the Flyers have been cursed, searching for a franchise goaltender for nearly 4 decades. If Pelle lives, does he secure a dynasty in the late 80s? We will never know. Their futures were stolen in a fraction of a second. In the end, the legacy of these men is not measured in the longevity of their careers or the total numbers on their hockey cards. It is measured in the sheer force of the impact they left on the game. They were stars that burned so incredibly bright that their light still reaches us today, decades after they were extinguished. We don't remember Eric Lindros, Vladimir Konstantinov, and Pelle Lindbergh for how their careers ended. We remember them for the moments they made us believe they were giants, and perhaps that is the ultimate victory over tragedy. To be remembered not for how you fell, but for how high you once flew. Thanks for watching. If you want to keep the memory of these legends alive, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments which hockey what if hurts the most. We'll see you in the next story.